Welcome to Transqat. I'm Claire McCarthy. Dan Woog is a Connecticut legend, journalist, soccer coach, LGBTQ advocate, author. His Woog's World column for the Westport News began in the 80s and has since evolved into the 06880 blog, which is now almost 15 years old. In this conversation, we do talk a little about his work in youth soccer. I especially like the bit where he takes me to task for underestimating the importance of soccer in the U.S. One should expect no less from the author of We Kick Balls, True Stories from the Youth Soccer Wars. Mostly, though, we talk about his 1995 book, Schools Out, The Impact of Gay and Lesbian Issues on America's Schools. The needle on human rights for queer people has pendulumed, if that's a word, quite a bit over the last 30 years, and we are currently, as Dan mentions, once again at a flashpoint. Enjoy. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to start with a little bit of a sideways swerve, and then hopefully you and I can bring it back on topic. You have a long history of involvement in youth soccer. Tell us a little bit about that. I know you've published books.
That is a tangent. Two parts of my life, LGBTQ and soccer.
Yeah.
And sometimes they intersect. I played in high school, Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut.
Go
Wreckers.
Wreckers.
Was not good enough to play at Brown University, but I covered the team for the school paper, the Brown Daily Herald, and got to travel all over the country. Soccer attracts intelligent, creative people who can think for themselves. There are no timeouts as there are in most other sports where the coach tells you what to do. You figure it out for yourself. And I like that. That's what I liked about the sport. I started youth coaching as soon as I graduated from college and returned to Westport. I wanted to get involved in some way. I asked my mentor, Albie Leffler, at Staples High School where there was a need, and he said, start a youth program. So I did. And over the ensuing years, as I moved up the ladder from youth to high school, from freshman to junior varsity to varsity coach, had just so many great experiences with wonderful people. Traveled all over the world. I took teams to Europe and Brazil and Australia. Met some fantastic people. Got involved in the National Coaches Organization, and I'm now on the National Board of Directors in charge of all their DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that involves LGBTQ, Black, Latino, Asian, Hispanic, women, Native American, disabilities, and faith-based. So it's a very progressive organization. I'm going off.
So working nationally to make sure that kids have an opportunity to be a part of this thing.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a coaches organization, so it's getting the coaches on board so that they can coach their kids well and inclusively. And
how many years? Sorry to jump in, but how many years were you the coach at Westport?
I started youth coaching in 1975, which dates me, since no one else will date me. I was the head coach for 20 years at Staples High School.
At Staples High School.
Great program. And I stepped down a year ago because my assistant was ready, young, sharp guy, ready to take over. And I did not want to be that guy that they're trying to move along, and he doesn't have any clue they're trying to move him along.
Yeah.
And it was the right move at the right time, but boy, did I have a great run.
Youth soccer, at least according to the NCYS website, is possibly the biggest athletic organization in the country. There's all sorts of levels of play. I know, speaking for myself, I shuttled my daughter around for years on a travel team. So every day was practices or games or tournaments. And a lot of what you were saying about the skills that it teaches are right on. And I saw that in her development. But here's what I'm getting at. Soccer is huge in high schools and lower levels as well. And it gets a lot of kids into college, right? People who maybe couldn't afford it or who couldn't get into a higher level school can get there through scholarships. And then in America, it's gone. If you asked anybody who's watching ESPN, they could not name a single U.S. men's or women's soccer team at the pro level. Maybe you could get one of the European teams out of them. Maybe somebody knows of Manchester United or Real Madrid, and get them to name a player. I mean, granted, we've had some superstar women's soccer players that they could probably come up with, but a guy? And I was just wondering your thoughts on why that is, why this amazing sport that so many kids across the country are involved in, we can't get it through to the next level at the professional level.
I disagree 10,000% with that assessment.
Do you really?
No, 100,000%.
Wow.
It has gotten an enormous foothold in this country at every level, the pros, international, and the demographics of the people who are interested is exactly what advertisers want. Huge amount of knowledge of the professional of the international game.
Yeah.
And NBC Sports with their Premier League. You mentioned the women, that's going through the roof in terms of them impacting not only young girls but young boys. You go to National Women's Game and the stands are filled with kids and families. FIFA, the game, the video game has got kids all over the country playing it and knowing the names of players. And just two other examples.
Go.
With the World Cup that was just concluded in December in Qatar, as I was watching the finals with Argentina and France, my phone blew up with people who were texting me who I had no idea were soccer fans, who had watched it and were so excited. And when the World Cup comes in 2026 to North America,
right.
it will be hosted by the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. You're going to see a sporting event like you've never seen before. It will blow the Super Bowl out of the water.
Well, I yield to your experience. I yield to your analysis. Where I was trying to go there is as a lead-in into your LGBTQ work, in that America, in general, painting in really broad strokes, tends to react to new things that aren't labeled as America, baseball or football or basketball. They approach new things with a bit of suspicion, with a bit of othering, and perhaps mocking. I've heard, jokes about soccer players diving.
Sure.
Yeah, and everybody has. It's not an accurate assessment, but it's a joke that gets told. And I was thinking that there's something of an analogy there with America dealing with queer issues and queer people, that somehow we're still 30 years on from your book, which we're going to talk a lot about here, we're still not in a place where queer people are entirely safe here. We're not in a place where even your average well-intentioned person feels well-informed or comfortable talking about it. And I was wondering if there's a metaphor there.
I think it's a great question, and I think you're onto something. And I think it comes both in soccer and queerness from a place of ignorance and fear.
Yeah.
The ignorance You're ignorant about soccer because you grew up with basketball and football and baseball. And soccer comes from Europe and South America. You're ignorant about LGBTQ issues because you grew up in a straight world and you saw straight role models and you saw guys and girls on TV and in movies and you saw your mom and your dad, and you are ignorant that these other types of sexualities are all around you. There are two ways to respond to that. And one is, oh my God, soccer is a pretty cool sport. Look at that. They're great athletes, and it's wonderful to watch.
And I'm going to sit here and appreciate it.
And I'm going to sit here and appreciate it. Or I don't want to know anything about it because it's different and they can't use their hands and they're a bunch of soccer fags. Or, wow, I didn't know that, two people of the same gender could love each other. And, oh my God, these two guys moved in next door to me and, they're really interesting people and I'd like to get to know them and I'll invite them to dinner. Or, oh my God, two guys moved in next door to me. What's happening to my world?
Whereas if you open yourself to it, you will find queer people with the same value set as you, with some of the same experiences, and an awful lot where you can relate.
Sure, and you'll find that their experiences are different. What was it like growing up in a family where you felt differently? Oh my God, I was adopted. I felt different because I was adopted. Oh my God, I'm left-handed. And, I pick up a scissors and, it's not meant for me. It's not made for me. If you are able and willing to open yourself to those different experiences, then the world opens up and you become a full, rich person. If you fear it, for whatever reason you think it is a threat, then you shut yourself off and you live a pretty lonely, cloistered life.
Yeah, you cut yourself off from beneficial experiences. Let me turn the clock back a little bit. It's 1995.
We were so young.
Oh, my goodness, weren't we? And you put out a book called Schools Out, The Impact of Gay and Lesbian Issues on America's Schools. And I'm fairly certain you wouldn't remember this because I'm not certain I'm remembering it correctly. But around that time, I was teaching in the Berkshires, and I worked for a group called the Berkshire County Safe Schools Network, which did trainings for teachers and administrators and guidance counselors on how to deal with queer youth. And as I started prepping for this, I'm pretty sure we brought you up to speak at some point. But
I believe with Pat Griffin. Yep, I remember it well.
Oh.
In my mind, I see that one-story building.
In Pittsfield, I think. Yeah.
Pittsfield, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. But in 95, when the book came out, I bought a copy, probably to read it to prep for when you spoke with us. And this, I had a 33-year run as a Latin teacher, and this was at all times either on my desk or on the bookshelf behind my desk. And so I wanted, as we're coming up on the 30th anniversary of this, I really wanted to talk to you about what led you to write it, your experiences doing that, and where you've seen progress or lack thereof afterwards. So Dan Woog, welcome to Transqat. Thanks for being here.
What a great intro.
I was going to ask if you would be willing to read a paragraph. This is from the introduction to your book, and I found it really moving and exactly where we are right now.
Sure. Thank you. Do we conclude that our buildings are breeding grounds for homophobia or hotbeds of homosexual activism? That our teachers are terrified to raise gay and lesbian issues in their classrooms or can't wait to do so? That our principals, superintendents, and school board members are terrified, prejudiced, and confused, or progressive, enlightened, and empathic? That millions of youngsters sit in school every day hearing words like faggot and queer, perhaps even using those taunts themselves, secretly wishing some adult will respond, and that sometimes someone does.
Yeah. 30 years down the road, what about that jumps out at you?
Boy, it's well written.
A professional journalist wrote that.
Who knew? I think it is both dated and very, very relevant.
Yeah.
And if you had asked me that 10 years ago, I probably would have just said it was dated. We've moved on. We get it. Educators understand that all schools have to be safe, welcoming, inclusive environments for all students.
Right.
And now, 10 years after that, we're not back at square one, but we're certainly regressing in a lot of ways, and queer issues is one of them. It's a flashpoint that I thought, and many of us thought, we had moved on from.
The things that jumped out at me are teachers afraid to bring the issue up. I think we've gone back to a point, as you say, not back to square one, but we are certainly at a point where teachers are, if not afraid, at least wary of bringing up queer issues for fear that they're going to get pushback from the community. I spent the last 4 or 5 years of my career also the school librarian, and that's another area of intense pushback right now. Whereas at one point, in the book, you're celebrating the fact that school librarians are starting to put things on the shelves that would speak to the lived experiences of kids like you and me, and now we're being told, no, take that off.
It's astonishing. It boggles the mind. And even we're sitting here in the Westport, Connecticut Public Library, and in this progressive town, 3 days ago, there was a hearing about 3 books.
Oh.
Flamer, Genderqueer, and this book is gay.
Yep. All 3 excellent books, by the way.
Excellent books. And
Juno Dawson, Maya Kobabe.
My God, they've won awards. They've been hailed by the American Library Association. And what happened was they were part of a display at the Staples High School Library that they have every year, the most challenged books of the year from the previous year. Mm-hmm. And there was not a peep at Staples High School about them, not from a faculty member, not from a kid, but there was from one parent. And she wanted them removed. And there's a 9-step process in Westport to challenge material that you don't like. And she initiated the process. And when she had a 1-hour hearing, she spoke for 1 hour, not very coherently, but her issue, as it turns out, stems from when she was growing up. For 5 years in homeroom, she sat behind 2 boys who passed back and forth pornographic material. Why she didn't ask to have her seat changed is beyond me, but she didn't. And she got up at this meeting and said that she wants to protect children from having to see what she saw 25 years ago. And that was her thing. And she read aloud, from all 3 books, cherry picking, of course, and taking out of context. So the next step in the process was that the 10-member ad hoc committee, including faculty members, librarians, community members, administrators, met to discuss her hour-long harangue. And that was 3 days ago. And they're all sitting there. Each of them had a copy of each of those books. So she ended up selling 30 copies of these books to the Westport Public Schools. And for 2 hours, they very thoughtfully and insightfully talked about her issues. They talked about the fact that she has every right to raise her kids as she wishes, but doesn't have a right to impose her views on an entire school. They talked about the impact of these books on students. And one of the members of the committee had Googled one of the books, I can't remember which it was, and found over 100 comments that said, "This book saved my life."
Yeah.
They talked about sexuality. They talked about kids growing up and seeing so much on their cell phones and on their laptops that they never saw when they were growing up. And they took a vote on each book on whether to recommend removal or not. And the votes for all three of those books was 10-0 in favor of keeping them.
Well done.
It was very affirming, and it was also a reminder that Westport is not like many other communities where those discussions are ongoing, where librarians are fearful, where parents are in the majority, where kids are being denied the right to learn information in a safe setting. So that's sort of a long answer to your question about where are we 30 years on.
Yeah.
We are in a place that I did not think we would be in.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's on behalf of those three books, I've read all three of them. I would say two things. One is that they are objected to because they're a talking point. They're on a list of books to object to. And have the objectors actually read them? Are they willing to read a book with the understanding that it might raise issues that make you uncomfortable, but it certainly isn't the pornography that those two boys were passing back and forth? And I don't want to downplay any sort of trauma of having seen pornography when you were a young teenager that you didn't want to. I can understand where that would be upsetting, but that has nothing to do with these books. I know that I went through high school in the late 70s, graduated in 81. I had nothing of the sort in order to help me find out who I was. There was nothing in my public library that would give me any sort of indication, nothing in my school library, nobody to ask. I'm assuming you had a fairly similar...
Yeah, I have 10 years on you. And the go-to in my era was a Dr. Rubin's Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Sex.
Oh, right.
But were afraid to ask. And it was considered groundbreaking. And, there were drawings of naked people and penises and vaginas and all that. And the section on homosexuality was that it was still wrong, deviant. And in the midst of all this groundbreaking sex education, there was this backward-thinking view of LGBTQ issues. And I had, that was my go-to. I knew on one level that he was wrong because there was nothing wrong with me.
Right.
But this was this was sort of the sex education of the time. I do not remember any discussion whatsoever of anything queer in health class, in the sex ed that we had. And the 2 or 3 teachers in our school who might have been gay were, sort of mocked and talked about behind their backs.
Right.
So that was my upbringing in the upper scale, progressive suburb of Westport, Connecticut. We are so far beyond that in so many ways. There's so much more focus on sex education, on talking about issues. The number of queer teachers at Staples who are out and open is through the roof, but still kids need that access to those materials. And in fact, one of the members of that committee that I talked about the 3 books, was a middle school librarian. And she said that she always and still finds certain books misplaced, because the kid will find the book and look at it and then put it in a special place so he or she can find it again.
Right.
And she doesn't get upset that the books are misplaced. She's happy that kids are getting that information.
Yeah. They would occasionally disappear from my shelves altogether, and I was delighted.
Joyful.
Please take this book. Let it be a guide to you. So all of this is part of your background when you start working on the book. What specifically made you want to do this? You interviewed over 300 people, every aspect of education. What brought you to it, and what was it like doing all that research?
Yeah, it fell into my lap. I am and have been a freelance writer. I've done corporate work, newspaper columns, magazines, speech writing, ghostwriting, you name it. But not only had I never written a book, I never had any intention of writing a book. I was used to 800 words, 1,000 words. 150,000 words is a different way of approaching things.
Get the lead on the paper.
Oh my God.
Get in, get out.
Yeah. In 1993, I went to the March on Washington for LGBTQ rights, whatever it was called then. And I went to an event at the headquarters of the National Education Association because I was doing substitute teaching and was interested in education. And I was sitting next to a guy, and we got talking, and I told him I was a writer, and he said, "Oh, I'm a publisher."
Ooh.
And he introduced himself. His name was Sasha Allison, and he owned the biggest, at the time, gay publishing company in the country. And he said, "God, I've been thinking about a book on education, gay issues in education. Would you be interested in talking about it?" So I never say never, and he invited me up to his office in Boston, and we talked for not a long time, and he offered me a contract. Like an idiot, I signed it, not even really looking at it.
Youth.
Thinking I would never get a book contract again. And so all of a sudden I had to write a book. And I spent a year interviewing people. And as you noted, it was a wide range. It was administrators, it was teachers, school nurses, coaches, parents, PTA people.
Private schools, public schools, rural, urban, across the map. Yeah.
Gay teachers, who were not at that point easy to find.
Yeah.
And some of them were in person, some of them were by phone. But as I did my research, one thing led to another. One idea, really sparked another. And I realized that there was this whole world out there of stories waiting to be told. Yeah. No one had ever told them before. So I really became a storyteller. There's nothing ties each chapter to the next one other than it is some facet of gay issues in education. And I guess it's kind of like, the blind men and the elephant. One of them, touches the trunk, one of them touches the tail, one the leg, and they all come up with a different way of looking at the elephant. And there are many ways of looking at queer issues in education.
That notion of doing it that way, and I don't know if Sasha originally intended this or wanted you to just sit down and write it, but what we get is a mosaic of all sorts of experiences, and you might not get a complete description of the elephant, but it's so much more memorable to hear this person say, well, here's my experience.
And it was pre-internet.
Yes.
I found I don't know how I did it. I found all these people, and I would, I guess, call or write them. Or
was it
fax.
kind of a chain of you would talk to one person and they would say, oh, you need to talk to X, or?
Some of it, and some of it was, I hadn't thought about phys ed teachers. Now I have to find me a phys ed teacher. And it was a lot of pre-internet networking.
It's not only pre-internet, though. It's almost everything in this book was novel in 93, 94, 95. The idea of a teacher coming out. I think at some point you mentioned that at the time you published, there were only 8 states that in which you could not be fired for immediately coming out. So that was new. The fact that teachers were just willing to risk being honest and out was new. The idea that you would have a GSA in a high school was new. I was asked to be the first advisor to the school in the Berkshires, and boy, that did not sit well with some of the other faculty members. But everything just seemed, wow, this is the first time we're dealing with this.
And it was the first time that a number of my interviewees had spoken to anyone about it. And as I look back, there were 2 sort of overriding emotions that came out of many of the interviews, not all of them, but many of the interviews. And one was trepidation. What risks am I taking? What will happen to me? And the other was freedom. The ability to express yourself and to talk about it and to be proud of who you were and what you were doing and the impact you were having. And I found out later from far more than one person that it was a turning point in their career, that it helped them, whatever it was, come out in the classroom, be able to be more open about who they were with their students, come out to a colleague or an administrator. And that had certainly not been my intention, but it was, I think, a really happy byproduct of the project.
And whatever it is your role in the school environment is, it's so much easier to do with both feet planted on the ground. Whether you're an administrator or a teacher or a student, it's if you can be honest about yourself, that makes, it doesn't make all the problems go away, but it just makes the ability to deal with them a little bit easier.
Well, and the amount of time, the psychic energy and the time that you have back is just, you spend so much time worrying about what will this person think, what will the person do, and all of a sudden you don't have to worry about it. Yeah. And it is an almost physical relief.
That was certainly my experience.
And it's so many people's experience. One of the, you probably know Garrett Stack. Garrett was an elementary principal in Stratford, Connecticut. And I don't know why I just thought of this, but he is one of those who spent so much time worrying about what would happen if, as an elementary school principal, he came out. And the 2 stories that remain in my mind, one is how much support he had, not just from his staff, but from the PTA. And one woman said to him, started talking to him in sort of whispering tones about gay stuff. And then she realized that it wasn't a secret, and she started talking about normal tones. And then one day she started banging the table because of some outrage. And he said, quiet, you have to calm down, there are kids around. And the other great story is when a little kid in his elementary school came up to him and said, Mr. Stacker, are you gay? And he said, well, what does that mean? And the kid looked at him and said, it's when 2 boys like each other. And he figures, that's a pretty good
That's
answer
age
for an
appropriate.
elementary school
Yeah.
kid. So he said, yes, and why do you want to know? And the kid said, oh, people just said it, and I wanted to make sure. And then Garrett said he skipped away. And, those are, I mean, for some reason I thought of Garrett when we were talking about the weight that was lifted from his shoulders.
Yeah. And if you put yourself in that kid's position, getting an adult to be honest with you is not always a frequent experience. It's pretty rare to be able to go up to an adult and ask something personal like that and have them treat you with respect enough to tell you the truth. He didn't have to hedge. He didn't have to lie. He just said, yeah. And followed up with how do you understand? What do you understand that to mean? And then everybody was satisfied.
Yeah.
One of the things, and I do not in any way mean for this to be a criticism, but I want us to talk about it, is that the book is filled with great stories about gay and lesbian and bisexual people. People like me don't show up. It is, wait a minute. Oh, there we go. Page 109 before the term transgendered shows up at all. And then I don't think there's any follow-up on it.
Nope.
Completely recognizing that I understand the answer to this, could you talk to that a little bit? Why are people like me not in this book in 1995?
It was not on my radar. It absolutely was not on my radar. It was, and we weren't using the term LGBTQ or LGBT. It was gay.
Right. As an umbrella universal term. Yeah.
And I didn't ask, I didn't seek out, and no one brought it up.
Yeah.
No one brought it up. And I think it was only in the past probably 15 years, half the time of the 30-year anniversary of the book, that it really got front and center in these sexuality discussions. And I noticed it myself. I spent 23 years as a founder and facilitator of Outspoken, which is the Triangle Community Center's youth group. Started that at exactly the same time, mid-90s. And in the beginning, the issues of the kids who came were, how do I come out? What if somebody finds out? Oh my God, I'm gay. What is my life going to be like? And probably about 15 years ago, we started seeing trans kids. And then we saw more and more of them. And the gay kids, the gay and lesbian kids, they stopped coming because they were out, they had role models, they felt affirmed in school, they were supported by their parents. They didn't need a support group. And they were supplanted by the trans kids who had the same questions as the gay kids had 15 years earlier.
Right.
Oh my God, what does this mean for my life? Who can I tell? What is my life going to be like? And we started seeing more and more trans kids.
To be fair, it wasn't on anybody's radar back then. And just to paint the picture a little more vividly, as part of the Berkshire County Safe Schools Network, I brought in the expert Dan Woog to talk to us, and I'm sitting there knowing who I am. I'm in a safe space where I would have been affirmed. I didn't say a thing.
Wow.
Didn't say a thing because I didn't see an authentic life ahead of me if I came out. I was building a career as an educator. I was making connections and doing my job and caring about my students. And I saw absolutely no way forward in being authentic. And I think probably at the time, transgender wasn't a word I would have reached for because it wasn't in the conversation.
Yeah, the word was transsexual.
Yes.
And that, like homosexual, that's got sex in there, and it's about so much more than sex.
The idea of gender identity, be it, gender nonconforming or non-binary or trans, was all lumped in under that sexual thing it took another, as you say, 15 years for people to start threading that out and saying, well, no, who you are is kind of an existential thing. who you want to be in bed with or who you want to be romantic with, that's a different issue.
Yeah. And that, what we're talking about here is, it's not rocket science, but it is sophisticated. No, that's the wrong word. It is complicated.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is, there's ignorance and fear of something different. Can you make that leap in your mind from, oh my God, there are people who think they're born in the wrong body, and I have no idea what that's like, but let me try to figure it out, or let me realize that they're not a threat to me, they're human like I am, or the people who are confronted with that fact and for whatever reason in their upbringing say to themselves, maybe, that's bad, that's wrong, or, oh my God, if they could be like that, what about me?
Yeah.
And if you haven't been brought up to be, I don't want to say open-minded, if you haven't been brought up to, be able to think and question and talk and ask, then you might not be able to wrap your head around that concept. The good thing is, you and I both, I think, have seen in places where we would not expect it, understanding, embracing, openness.
Yes.
And, especially from people who we might, who might close the door. Instead, they open it, They welcome everyone in, and they get it, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah. And part of that is work like your book, right? That your book lays the foundation for that. That maybe the principal or the superintendent who was there when I came out, maybe they wouldn't have been so open to that as a possibility 15 years ago. But because the work has been done to educate people and say, there's nothing threatening. If you were okay with McCarthy as a teacher before, you're fine with her now. It's not a big deal.
I just thought of something from that challenged books meeting that we were talking about a while ago. And one of the committee members was Westport's assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction named Anthony Buono. And he said that after reading the book, which the complainant had not thoroughly read the book, but Anthony said that when he was a principal at a middle school 15 or 16 years ago, that was his first experience with a trans student. And he said, if I had read this book before that, I would have acted differently. I thought it was a great thing, very vulnerable, an important thing for him to say. And he followed that up by saying, fortunately, I was surrounded by people who knew more than I did, and they helped make the right decisions for this trans student.
There are well-intentioned people out there who want to do their jobs well. And to that end, things like GSAs that were so new 30 years ago and bringing queer issues into the curriculum, which was new 30 years ago, the pushback is this argument that we're making kids queer by doing that we're presenting something to them that they hadn't considered before, and that they look at and go, oh, well, that sounds cool. Let me try that. How do we counter that?
It's such a
I see shaking your
bizarre argument. And just as an aside, I think it's important to note that GSAs, which started out as gay-straight alliances, are now referred to as gender sexuality alliances,
Right.
which is, just part of the evolution. But, I mean, my God, you and I both grew up, in a world surrounded by heterosexuality, and we did not become straight.
Right.
The world, every movie I saw, every TV show, every time one of my friends talked about, banging his girlfriend, the world tried to make me straight, and it didn't work. Yeah. I can't imagine that the opposite would hold true. It's just such an odd argument.
You would have to, one would think, you would have to accept as a premise that your kids are deeply and dangerously gullible. And that was never my experience as a teacher. I'm assuming it wasn't for you as a coach.
No. Well, and it also, the other part of that is that if that happens, there's something wrong with it.
Right.
Doesn't every parent want his or her child to be happy and safe and feel good and have a good life? I mean, I can't imagine a parent saying, I want my kid to be really screwed up, and hate themselves.
So wound up with stress that they can't function.
Yeah. Or I want 5 of my kids to, be really happy, and the 6th one I don't give a shit about. It's just, and so when you, if your child is questioning or trans or lesbian or gay or bi or polyamorous or asexual or, all these terms that I don't even know anymore, if that is the case and they are happy and they have a good life, why is it any business of yours?
Right.
Just, I've said it before, it boggles the mind.
Yeah, if the issue is the well-being of the kids, you need to, and this brings us back to the opening discussion, you need to be able to open your mind to the fact that well-being for this person might not be what you had imagined. And you might just have to kind of adjust accordingly. And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Your child's life is not yours. You can't predetermine what your child is going to be like in any way. You can guide them, you can provide guideposts, you can give them the values you think are important, but their life is not yours. And their life is also not a judgment on your skills as a parent. So many people seem to think that they are judged by, whether their child is wealthy or gets into this college or, marries this person who is the right person, and parenting is not a contest. It's not a race. Yeah. It's
you're not being graded.
You're not being graded. The only grade you should get is, if your kid loves you and doesn't want you to put you in an old age home when you're drooling all over yourself.
Yeah, I've already begun the drooling part, and I'm a little concerned about that because that seems a little early to me. There was one other thing I wanted to ask you about, and that was that you and I reconnected through Proud Academy and an event that they had, and you are now in a leadership position with Proud Academy. So tell me about your involvement there and where you are and what you hope to do.
Sure. I'm the vice something, president or chair or something, of the board of directors of Proud Academy. And Proud Academy is a school that will open, God willing, in September, and we're looking at Ansonia for LGBTQ kids and allies. Really anyone who is having a tough time in a regular school setting. Patty Nicolari, who was a phys ed teacher and administrator in Ansonia, wonderful woman is the brains and the brawn behind this. And there's a fantastic board of very diverse people. And the need for this is 30 years after I wrote Schools Out, the need is still really, really strong. The need is there for kids. And many of the inquiries we've had are from trans or non-binary kids and their families, their loved ones. The need to be able to go to school and not worry about what some kid is going to say, not worry about, not going to the bathroom. That need is still there. It will be a regular private school, with high academic standards, teaching also queer history and, the history of America and the world that sometimes isn't taught in all aspects. But it will be only the fifth of its kind in the nation. There's one in New York.
And that's a point of not a lot of progress, because in the book, you talk about the Harvey Milk Academy.
Right.
And so to be 30 years down the road, and there are only four with Proud Academy being...
I thought in the beginning there would be no need because, we've come this far.
Right.
So there's one in New York, one in San Francisco, one in Milwaukee, and one in Birmingham, Alabama. We have had incredible interest from a number of students and families and from staff, people who want to be part of this journey. So we're very excited. There's a ton of work to be done, everything from curriculum and desks,
right,
to buying a flag.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely necessary, and anyone who is interested should just Google Proud Academy Connecticut and go to the website, proudacademyct.org, and learn about this, this great new school that's coming to a state near you soon.
And do what you can to support it,
Sure.
because it's going to be amazing. Dan, this has been such a privilege. Thank you so much for being here, for your time. Thanks for dragging me into this amazing library. I might not leave. This is,
you know what? You're a librarian. Wander around.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
It really is pretty cool. And your questions were fantastic.
Thank you.
Great. I've had a great time. You've made me think, which any educator should do. And thank you for all your work on behalf of so many kids over so many years.
Thank you. As I was editing this episode, I realized that I've been affected by Dan's book even more than I'd realized. The format of Schools Out, a mosaic of authentic experiences and voices, that's what Transqat's all about. He accurately captured a point in time for the gay rights movement, a time when the role of queer people in education was changing. Dan got it right. No one person has all the answers. The truth is in the aggregate. Apparently, I steal only from the best. Next up on Transqat is a conversation with Celeste Lacine, one of the founders of the Trevor Project. Look for me at the Transqat booth at the Guilford, Middletown, and West Hartford Pride events. I'll be recording your responses to the question, what does pride mean to me? And then we'll use those responses in an upcoming episode. I'm Claire McCarthy. This has been Transqat. Thank you for listening, and let's talk soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece. Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC. Copyright 2022, all rights reserved. Join us on the web at transqat.com. That's TRANSQAT.com. There, you'll find links to Transqat, the blog, writing projects, speaking engagements, and more. You can also meet the team who thought spelling cat with a Q was a good idea. Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Leave us a comment on whatever platform you use to stream this podcast. just remember to be kind. She has enough self-esteem problems already. To reach Claire with a question or a suggestion for an upcoming episode, just use the contact page at the website or email her directly at crmtranscat@gmail.com. Thanks for listening!